I found hidden cameras in my apartment. My girlfriend said, your therapist made me install them. Natasha said, I was assigned to you. She was standing by the door like she'd locked us in and now regretted it. She said it again. Dr. Brennan assigned me to you. Our relationship was part of something bigger. I stood there trying to process what those words meant. Assigned. Something bigger. Then I realized that the ring I'd hidden in my sock drawer suddenly felt like evidence of my own stupidity. Quinn finally moved and walked past Natasha to the living room. He started pulling books off his shelf one by one, letting them fall to the floor. Behind the third row, he found a small black camera pointed directly at his couch. The lens caught the light. Natasha made a sound behind him, but he ignored it. He moved to the TV and found another camera wedged behind the frame. Under the coffee table sat a recording device no bigger than a USB drive. Quinn counted 5 cameras total and 3 audio recorders strategically placed to capture every angle of his apartment. He turned to Natasha holding one of the cameras and asked how long these had been here. Natasha wrapped her arms around herself and said since the second week. Dr. Brennan had given her the equipment and specific instructions on placement. Quinn asked if she'd been recording him this entire time. Natasha nodded. He asked if Dr. Brennan had watched the footage. Another nod. Quinn threw the camera against the wall and it broke into pieces. He asked what else. Natasha pulled out her phone with shaking hands and opened an app. The screen showed a dashboard with Quinn's name at the top. Below were graphs tracking his emotional patterns, stress responses, and behavioral changes over 6 months. Detailed notes accompanied each data point describing his reactions to specific situations. Quinn grabbed the phone and scrolled through months of observations. March 14th. Subject showed increased anxiety when discussing childhood. Recommended partner introduce father-related conversation during intimate moment to measure attachment response. April 3rd. Subject demonstrated avoidant behavior after work conflict. Partner successfully de-escalated using techniques from session notes. May 22. Subject's trust levels increasing. Partner to maintain current approach while introducing minor stressors to test resilience. Every private moment between them had been analyzed and manipulated. Quinn looked at Natasha and asked if anything about their relationship had been real. Natasha's face crumpled, but Quinn didn't care about her tears anymore. She said she'd fallen in love with him somewhere around month 3. Everything after that point had been genuine feelings even though she'd kept reporting to Dr. Brennan. Quinn asked why she didn't stop. Natasha said Dr. Brennan had told her that ending the documentation early would damage her own recovery progress. If she wanted to overcome her social anxiety, she needed to complete the full program. Quinn asked what program. Natasha opened her phone again and showed him a document titled Patient Integration Study. The file listed 7 other names besides theirs. All of them were Dr. Brennan's patients. All of them had been paired together. Quinn sat down on his couch and read through the document. Each patient pair had specific objectives. Kara and Blake were studying codependency patterns. Felix and Morgan were examining caretaker dynamics in relationships where one partner had severe depression. Delilah and Owen were analyzing how childhood trauma affected adult attachment styles. Dr. Brennan had been running controlled experiments on her patients for at least 3 years. She'd documented everything and written analysis papers that she'd submitted to psychology journals under the guise of observational research. Quinn looked up at Natasha and asked if these other patients knew they were being studied. Natasha said she didn't think so until 2 days ago. Someone had created a group chat and added all the partners who'd been assigned to other patients. They'd started comparing experiences and realized what Dr. Brennan had been doing. One person mentioned finding additional files on Dr. Brennan's computer. Another talked about discovering hidden cameras in their apartment too. The group was trying to figure out what to do with the information. Natasha showed Quinn the chat. Messages filled the screen. People were angry and confused and scared. One woman named Kara had written that her assigned partner Blake had become violent during their relationship and Dr. Brennan had encouraged her to stay with him to work through her confrontation issues. Quinn asked Natasha for the names of everyone in that chat. She forwarded him the contact list. 7 names total. He opened his laptop and started searching for information about Dr. Sylvia Brennan. Her credentials were impressive. PhD from Stanford. Published researcher. 20 years of clinical experience. Testimonials from former patients praising her innovative methods. Quinn clicked on her publications and found 3 papers from the last 2 years. All of them discussed breakthrough techniques in anxiety management using real-world relationship integration. The papers cited case studies, but never named the subjects. Quinn realized he was reading about himself, and Natasha described in clinical language as if they were willing participants. Natasha's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and her face went pale. She showed Quinn a text from Dr. Brennan. Emergency session tonight. My office. Both of you. 9 p.m. This is not optional. Quinn checked the time. 7:30? He asked Natasha what would happen if they didn't go. She said Dr. Brennan had leverage over both of them. She had 18 months of Quinn's therapy records documenting every insecurity and fear. She could use that information to destroy his credibility if he tried to expose her. For Natasha, she had recordings of her admitting to planting the cameras and documenting Quinn without his consent. Dr. Brennan could frame Natasha as the primary perpetrator and claim she'd gone rogue. Quinn stood and grabbed his keys. Natasha asked where he was going. He said to find a lawyer before that meeting. Natasha said most offices would be closed. Quinn said then he'd find one who answered emergency calls, because he wasn't walking into Dr. Brennan's office without legal representation. He told Natasha to forward him every piece of evidence she had, every email from Dr. Brennan, every instruction, every file. Natasha started sending documents to his email. Quinn's phone pinged repeatedly as dozens of files came through. He grabbed his laptop and headed for the door. Natasha asked if she should come with him. Quinn said no and left. Quinn drove to the office building where his friend Amit worked. Amit was a corporate lawyer, but he'd know who to call. Quinn took the elevator to the 14th floor and found Amit still at his desk. Amit looked up surprised and asked what was wrong. Quinn said he needed help finding a lawyer who specialized in medical malpractice or ethics violations. Amit's expression turned serious. He closed his laptop and told Quinn to explain everything. Quinn spent 20 minutes laying out the entire situation. Natasha's confession, the cameras, the patient pairing program, Dr. Brennan's research papers, the group chat with other victims. Amit listened without interrupting, and his jaw got tighter with each detail. When Quinn finished, Amit pulled out his phone and made a call. He spoke quietly to someone for a few minutes, then hung up. He said his colleague, Philip Ortega, specialized in professional misconduct cases and had agreed to an emergency consultation. Philip's office was downtown, and he could see them in 30 minutes. Amit grabbed his jacket and said he was coming along. They drove to Philip's building in Amit's car. The office was on the 3rd floor. Philip met them at the door. He was in his 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes. He led them to a conference room and told Quinn to start from the beginning. Quinn walked Philip through finding the cameras, Natasha's confession about being assigned to him, Dr. Brennan orchestrating their meeting and monitoring their relationship, the other patient pairs who'd been similarly manipulated. Philip took notes and asked clarifying questions. When Quinn mentioned the research papers, Philip's expression darkened. He asked if Quinn had copies. Quinn pulled up the published articles on his laptop. Philip read through them carefully. After several minutes, he looked up and said this was one of the most egregious ethics violations he'd encountered. Dr. Brennan had conducted unauthorized human research, violated patient confidentiality, and committed fraud by publishing studies without informed consent. Philip asked to see the evidence Natasha had sent. Quinn opened his email and showed him the files. Emails between Natasha and Dr. Brennan discussing Quinn's behavior patterns, instructions for placing cameras, analysis reports documenting Quinn's emotional responses, video files showing Quinn in his own apartment during vulnerable moments. Philip scrolled through everything methodically. He paused on one video file and asked Quinn if he'd consented to being recorded. Quinn said he'd had no idea the cameras existed until tonight. Philip said that made it illegal surveillance in addition to everything else. He asked if Quinn was willing to pursue this aggressively. Quinn said yes. Philip said they needed to move fast. Philip explained their options. File formal complaints with the State Psychology Licensing Board and the American Psychological Association. Submit evidence to the district attorney for potential criminal charges. Contact the other victims and build a coordinated case. Philip warned that Dr. Brennan would fight back hard. She'd try to discredit Quinn by using his mental health history against him. She'd claim he was having a breakdown or misinterpreting therapeutic methods. They needed overwhelming evidence and multiple witnesses to counter her defense. Quinn asked about the meeting Dr. Brennan had demanded for 9. Philip checked his watch. 8:15. He said Quinn should not go to that meeting without legal representation. Philip called Dr. Brennan's office and left a message stating he was representing Quinn and any communication should go through him. Then he called the other patients from the group chat. 3 of them answered. Philip explained who he was and asked if they'd be willing to give statements. 2 said yes immediately. The 3rd said she'd think about it. Philip scheduled meetings with the 2 for the next morning. He told Quinn to go home and document everything he could remember from his therapy sessions with Dr. Brennan. Every conversation, every piece of advice she'd given, anything that might have been designed to manipulate him toward Natasha. Quinn said he'd start tonight. Amit drove Quinn back to his apartment. Quinn stood outside the building for a moment, not wanting to go in. The place felt contaminated now. Every room had been monitored. Every private moment had been recorded and analyzed. Amit asked if Quinn wanted to stay at his place instead. Quinn said yes. They drove to Amit's apartment across town. Amit set Quinn up in the guest room and brought him a laptop. Quinn spent the next 4 hours writing everything he could remember. He started with his first session with Dr. Brennan 18 months ago. He'd been struggling with social anxiety and trust issues stemming from his parents' divorce when he was 12. Dr. Brennan had been warm and understanding and encouraging. Around month 6, Dr. Brennan had started asking more questions about Quinn's romantic history, what kind of partner he was attracted to, what qualities mattered most to him, what his fears were about intimate relationships. Quinn had thought she was helping him prepare for when he was ready to date again. Now he realized she'd been building a profile to match him with the perfect assigned partner. 2 months later, Natasha had appeared in his life. The coffee shop meeting had felt like fate. Natasha was everything Dr. Brennan's questions had identified as Quinn's ideal match. Patient and understanding, good at reading his moods, comfortable with his need for space. It had all been engineered. Quinn wrote until 3 in the morning. By then, he had 15 pages of detailed notes about his therapy sessions and his relationship with Natasha. Every red flag he'd ignored, every moment that had felt slightly off, but that he'd dismissed as his anxiety talking. Dr. Brennan had been in his head for 18 months, learning exactly how to manipulate him. She'd use that knowledge to craft a relationship that would feel real enough to study while being controlled enough to document. Quinn fell asleep at the desk with his head on his arms. Amit woke him at 7 with coffee and breakfast. Philip had called. The meetings with the other victims were scheduled for 9 and 10. They drove to Philip's office downtown. The first victim was already waiting in the conference room. Her name was Kara. She was in her early 30s with dark circles under her eyes. Philip introduced everyone and asked Kara to tell her story. She said she'd been seeing Dr. Brennan for 2 years, working through anxiety from an abusive childhood. Dr. Brennan had suggested she try dating again. 2 weeks later, a man named Blake had approached her at a bookstore. They'd started seeing each other. Blake had seemed perfect at first, patient with her triggers, understanding about her boundaries. But after 3 months, he'd started getting controlling, demanding to know where she was, going through her phone, getting angry when she wanted space. Kara said she'd told Dr. Brennan about Blake's behavior during her sessions. Dr. Brennan had encouraged her to stay in the relationship and work through her fear of confrontation. She'd said this was an opportunity for growth. The situation had escalated over the next 2 months. Blake had become verbally abusive. He'd isolated Kara from her friends. One night he'd shoved her during an argument and she'd hit her head on a table. Kara had ended up in the emergency room with a concussion. Dr. Brennan had visited her at the hospital and told her this was a learning experience, that she'd successfully set a boundary by leaving. Kara had felt grateful to Dr. Brennan for helping her through the trauma. She'd had no idea the entire relationship had been arranged. Kara said she'd discovered the truth 3 days ago. Blake had reached out apologizing and saying he needed to tell her something. They'd met for coffee, and he'd confessed that Dr. Brennan had told him about Kara during one of his therapy sessions. Dr. Brennan had described a patient who needed help learning to stand up for herself. She'd suggested Blake could work on his anger management issues by practicing controlled relationship conflict with this patient. Blake had been given information about where to find Kara and what approach would work best. He'd genuinely developed feelings for her, but Dr. Brennan had been encouraging him to escalate the controlling behavior to create opportunities for Kara to practice assertiveness. Quinn felt sick listening to Kara's story. Dr. Brennan had deliberately put her patient in danger to study her responses. Philip asked if Kara had any evidence. She pulled out her phone and showed them text messages from Blake admitting to the setup. She also had medical records from her hospital visit and session notes from Dr. Brennan discussing the relationship. Philip said this was strong evidence of extreme negligence and reckless endangerment. He asked if Kara was willing to file a formal complaint. She said absolutely. She wanted Dr. Brennan's license revoked and criminal charges filed. Philip said they'd make that happen. The second victim arrived at 10. His name was Felix. He was thin and pale and kept his eyes on the floor while he talked. He said he'd been seeing Dr. Brennan to deal with depression and anxiety. She'd encouraged him to start dating as part of his recovery. A woman named Morgan had messaged him on a dating app. They'd connected immediately. Morgan was sweet and understanding about his mental health struggles. They'd dated for 4 months. During that time, Morgan's own depression had gotten worse. She'd started having suicidal thoughts. Felix had felt responsible for helping her. He'd spent all his time and energy trying to keep her stable. Dr. Brennan had told him this was good practice for managing his savior complex. Felix said Morgan had attempted suicide 2 months into their relationship. She'd taken pills and Felix had found her and called an ambulance. She'd survived, but Felix had completely broken down. He'd started having panic attacks and couldn't sleep. Dr. Brennan had documented everything during his sessions. She'd asked detailed questions about how he'd felt finding Morgan, what his physical symptoms had been, how the trauma was affecting his daily functioning. Felix had thought she was helping him process the experience. Last week, Morgan had contacted him and confessed that Dr. Brennan had told her about Felix during her therapy sessions. Morgan had been instructed to pursue the relationship and to be open about her depression so Felix could practice emotional boundaries. Felix said Dr. Brennan had been monitoring Morgan's mental health decline and using it as a case study. She'd known Morgan was becoming suicidal, but hadn't intervened because she wanted to see how Felix would respond. When Morgan attempted suicide, Dr. Brennan had treated it as valuable data about crisis management rather than a preventable tragedy. Felix had emails from Dr. Brennan discussing the situation in clinical terms. He also had records from his own psychiatric hospitalization after his breakdown. Philip listened to the entire story, and his expression was furious. He said Dr. Brennan's actions went beyond malpractice into criminal negligence. She'd knowingly allowed a patient to deteriorate to the point of attempting suicide so she could study another patient's response. Philip spent the next hour getting detailed statements from both Kara and Felix. He had them sign declarations authorizing him to file complaints on their behalf. By noon, he had enough evidence to submit to the state licensing board. He drafted formal complaints documenting the patient pairing scheme, the unauthorized research, the ethical violations, and the physical and psychological harm caused to multiple patients. He included the video files, emails, research papers, and medical records. Philip said the board would have no choice but to launch an immediate investigation, given the severity of the allegations. He'd also be contacting the district attorney's office about criminal charges. Quinn asked what would happen next. Philip said the board would notify Dr. Brennan of the complaint within 24 hours. She'd be required to respond and would likely have her license temporarily suspended pending investigation. The criminal process would take longer, but Philip was confident they had enough evidence for charges of fraud, illegal surveillance, and reckless endangerment at minimum. Philip asked Quinn if he'd heard from Dr. Brennan since last night. Quinn checked his phone, 5 missed calls and 3 text messages. The texts started concerned and got progressively threatening. The last one said, "Your actions will have consequences, Quinn. I have documentation of everything you've told me. Think carefully about what you're doing." Philip read the messages and said Dr. Brennan was trying to intimidate Quinn into silence. He told Quinn to block her number and not respond to any communication. Philip would handle everything from here. Quinn asked about Natasha. Philip said Natasha's situation was complicated. She'd been complicit in the surveillance and documentation, but she'd also been manipulated by Dr. Brennan. Whether she faced legal consequences would depend on how cooperative she was and whether prosecutors decided to charge her. Quinn said Natasha had been the one to confess and provide evidence. Philip said that would work in her favor. Quinn left Philip's office feeling exhausted, but slightly less helpless. At least now someone was taking action. Amit drove him back to his apartment to get clothes and personal items. Quinn packed a bag quickly, trying not to look at the spaces where the cameras had been. His phone rang, unknown number. He answered and heard Dr. Brennan's voice. She said they needed to talk before Quinn did something irreversible. He'd misunderstood her therapeutic methods. She could explain everything if he'd just meet with her. Quinn said he had a lawyer now and she should direct all communication through him. Dr. Brennan's voice changed. She said Quinn was making a serious mistake. She had 18 months of documentation showing his unstable mental state. If he pursued this, she'd have no choice but to reveal everything to protect herself and her other patients. Quinn said go ahead. He had video evidence of her discussing her illegal research. He had testimony from multiple victims. He had her published papers that proved she'd been conducting unauthorized experiments. Dr. Brennan went silent. Then she said quietly that Quinn had no idea what he was dealing with. She'd built her reputation over 20 years, and she wasn't going to let a paranoid patient destroy it. She'd fight back with everything she had. Quinn said he expected nothing less and ended the call. He forwarded the recording to Philip. Philip called back immediately and said Dr. Brennan had just made another mistake. Threatening a patient who'd filed a complaint against her would only strengthen their case. 2 days later, Philip called with news. The state psychology board had launched an emergency investigation. Dr. Brennan's license had been temporarily suspended. She was prohibited from seeing patients or practicing therapy pending the outcome of the investigation. The board had also referred the case to law enforcement. The district attorney's office had opened a criminal investigation. They'd be interviewing witnesses and gathering evidence over the next few weeks. Philip said this was moving faster than he'd expected because the evidence was so overwhelming. Dr. Brennan's attorney had reached out trying to negotiate, but Philip had refused. They wanted a full investigation and prosecution. Quinn asked about the other patients from the group chat. Philip said he'd been in contact with all of them. 4 were willing to testify. The others were too scared or wanted to move on without legal involvement. But 4 witnesses plus Quinn, Kara, and Felix was more than enough. Philip was also pursuing the publishers who'd accepted Dr. Brennan's research papers. They'd published studies based on data obtained without informed consent, which violated research ethics. The publishers were launching their own investigations and would likely retract the papers. Dr. Brennan's academic reputation was being dismantled piece by piece. 3 weeks later, the district attorney filed criminal charges. Dr. Brennan was charged with fraud, illegal surveillance, practicing medicine without informed consent, and reckless endangerment. The charges carried a potential sentence of up to 8 years in prison. Her attorney released a statement claiming the charges were baseless and that Dr. Brennan had been practicing innovative but ethical therapeutic methods. The statement said her patients had benefited from her unconventional approaches, and this was a coordinated attack by individuals who'd failed to appreciate her groundbreaking work. The statement was torn apart immediately. Psychology ethics experts were quoted in news articles explaining why what Dr. Brennan had done violated every professional standard. The story broke in the local news first, then went national. Therapist accused of experimenting on patients without consent. Major newspapers picked it up. Dr. Brennan's photo appeared on television alongside details of the patient pairing scheme. The psychology community responded with outrage. Professional organizations issued statements condemning her actions. Former colleagues distanced themselves. The university where she'd taught ethics classes suspended her pending their own investigation. Quinn watched the coverage from Amit's apartment. His phone kept buzzing with messages from people he hadn't talked to in years. Everyone wanted to know if he was okay and if the news stories were true. Natasha texted, asking if they could talk. Quinn had been avoiding her for 3 weeks. He finally agreed to meet at a coffee shop. She looked terrible when she arrived. She'd lost weight, and her eyes were red. She sat across from Quinn and immediately started apologizing. She said she'd been cooperating fully with Philip and the prosecutors. She'd given them everything she had and answered every question. She'd also voluntarily surrendered her phone and laptop for forensic analysis. Philip had told her she likely wouldn't face criminal charges if she continued to cooperate, but she'd never be able to work in any capacity that involved patient care or confidential information. Quinn asked Natasha what she wanted from him. She said nothing. She knew he'd never forgive her, and she didn't expect him to. She just wanted him to know that falling in love with him had been real, even if everything else was fake. Somewhere between the third date and the fourth month, she'd stopped following Dr. Brennan's instructions and started making her own choices. But by then, she was in too deep and didn't know how to get out without destroying both of them. Quinn said she should have told him the truth immediately. Natasha said he was right. She'd been a coward, and he'd paid the price. They sat in silence for a minute. Then Natasha said goodbye and walked out. Quinn watched her leave and felt nothing. The love he'd had for her was gone, completely erased by the betrayal. The trial was set for 6 months later. Philip kept Quinn updated on the proceedings. Dr. Brennan's attorney tried every possible defense, claimed the patients had consented to innovative methods, argued that the research was for their benefit, attempted to discredit the witnesses by highlighting their mental health issues. None of it worked. The evidence was too strong. Video recordings, email chains, published papers, testimony from multiple victims, medical records documenting the harm caused. The jury heard everything over 3 weeks of trial. They deliberated for 8 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. The judge sentenced Dr. I. Brennan to 5 years in prison, plus restitution to all identified victims. During the sentencing hearing, the judge said Dr. Brennan had violated the most fundamental principle of medicine, which was to do no harm. She'd exploited vulnerable people who'd come to her for help. She'd turned their suffering into research data. She'd prioritized her career over their well-being. The judge said Dr. Brennan's actions had damaged not just her victims, but the entire therapeutic profession. Trust was the foundation of therapy, and Dr. Brennan had destroyed that trust for everyone she'd touched. Dr. Brennan showed no emotion as the sentence was read. She was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. Quinn walked out of the courthouse with Kara and Felix and the other victims who'd testified. News cameras were waiting outside. Philip gave a brief statement saying justice had been served and his clients could finally begin healing. Quinn didn't speak to the reporters. He just got in Amit's car and left. That evening, he sat in Amit's apartment and felt the weight he'd been carrying finally lift. It wasn't satisfaction exactly, more like exhaustion mixed with relief. Dr. Brennan was in prison. Her license was permanently revoked. Her reputation was destroyed. She'd never be able to harm another patient. 2 years later, Quinn sat in his new therapist's office. Dr. Patel was in her 60s with kind eyes and impeccable ethics. She'd helped Quinn work through the trauma of being experimented on by someone he'd trusted. The process had been slow and painful, but Quinn was finally starting to feel like himself again. He'd moved to a new apartment in a different part of the city. He'd changed jobs to get away from people who knew his story. He was rebuilding his life piece by piece. Dr. Patel asked how he was feeling about dating again. Quinn said he wasn't ready yet. Maybe someday, but not now. The idea of trusting someone enough to be vulnerable still felt impossible. Dr. Patel said that was okay. Healing happened at its own pace, and Quinn shouldn't rush it. Quinn heard that Natasha had moved to another state. She'd started over somewhere no one knew about her involvement with Dr. Brennan. He hoped she was getting help. Despite everything, she'd been a victim too, just in a different way. Kara had started a support group for people who'd been harmed by unethical therapists. Felix was doing better, but still struggled with anxiety around relationships. The others were managing as best they could. They'd all been changed by what Dr. Brennan had done. Some wounds healed cleaner than others. Quinn knew he'd carry scars from this experience for the rest of his life, but at least now he knew the truth, and the person responsible had faced consequences. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now, and let me know your take in the comments.